So, Death Battle. With the recent release of Goku vs. Superman 2023 on the Death Battle YouTube channel, which was a great episode, go check it out, this decade-old question has been subjectively answered. But, with the heat that this argument can bring out of people, this makes me reflect about some of the most controversial episodes in the show's history. These are episodes that end up being widely negatively received in one or more ways. A way to indicate one of these episodes would be simply looking at the like to dislike ratio. Let's begin with possibly the most recent example of these episodes. Macho Man vs. KoolAid Man. The episode itself isn't hated in any way. In fact, it's seen as one of the most underwhelming episodes that came out in 2021. The animation, music, and analysis mid-battle were all fun in their own ways, but fast forward to Macho Man's death, and there it is. If you're unaware, Randy Poffo, the person who played Macho Man, was a very influential figure, and not only inside the professional wrestling world, and had unfortunately passed away because of a heart attack. And now you see the problem. The idea itself was creative enough, but having Macho Man die because of his chest exploding was an oversight that I'm shocked that no one on the production team had picked up. This obviously got a good amount of people mad to the point where they started to vilify the Death Battle team for having the battle end like this. I don't think this is the case one bit, but sure, it was a massive oversight, but if there's any ill intent toward Randy, they wouldn't, I don't know, have KoolAid Man revive him and imply that both guys are friends and spar on a weekly basis, or even gush over Randy and his accomplishments and his rundown. I see this much more of the fans and viewers just crafting a reason to not like the episode. But just because it's a good episode doesn't mean it still is in bottom 5 of season 8 for me. Wah wah. Now it's time for, oh my god. In the year 2023, I did not think that I would ever have to cover the war ground that is Ben 10 vs. Green Lantern. Not once, but twice in the same year. But here we are. It truly is impossible to talk about controversial death battles without bringing up this one. I could talk about how good the episode actually is as a whole and go over each individual bullet point that makes it good, but all that isn't exactly what the episode's best known for. The biggest takeaway from this episode is that we got the legendary Time Bomb meme that was buried into the ground not even a whole year after this episode was released. That and the fact out of the 186 episodes that the show has to offer, this episode is somehow the one with the biggest backlash. Not because of the episode's general quality, but because of two things in specific. The first being the verdict. The verdict of each episode is ultimately subjective and should not be taken as indisputable fact. However, I feel like this statement applies to this episode especially. That said, I don't disagree with Green Lantern being deemed the winner because this is what the Death Battle research team concluded based on the research that they did. But seeing how literally Stomp on Ben verbatim rustled quite a few jimmies across the internet, from both casual and regular viewers of the show. Call me crazy, but seeing an intergalactic superhero cut off this random kid's arms with scissors and splatter his body on the ground seems a bit excessive from the casual eye. Not helped by the argument of Alien X being debatably stronger coming from casual viewers and versus debaters alike, but that's a topic to be discussed for another never. The post-analysis doesn't do a great job of conveying Hal's victory either. Everything discussed makes sense, but watching the conclusion back, you come to realize that all of the valid points for Hal's victory are in the black boxes in the top right, which don't get mentioned verbally and can be missed really easily if you don't end up reading them. In fact, not a single calculation was said verbally in the post-analysis either, a fact that baffles me considering how much season 6 and 7 love their numbers. It isn't the fact that what is actually said are bad arguments, it's the fact that the actual good arguments can be easily skipped over if one isn't paying too much attention. Community backlash got so bad that many people ultimately ended up calling this the worst death battle ever, which I find a bit excessive considering that there are episodes that would objectively deserve that title. But if one has strong enough reason to call this the worst death battle ever, who am I to tell them otherwise? So, we have an episode that doesn't deserve its hate a single bit, and the most divided episode in the show's history. Where could I possibly drag this out to now? Yeah, that makes sense. I know this is quite the jump in time compared to the other two, but Mewtwo vs. Shadow is a very special episode. Now, if we ignore the existence of Ben 10 vs. Green Lantern and that one Season 1 episode everyone refuses to name, this is widely considered the worst episode in the show's history. Because of one reason in particular, this episode feels like a slap in the face to the characters, more specifically, Shadow. But I will admit, the character rundowns are not nearly as bad as others made it out to be. But why the heck didn't they talk about Mega Mewtwo X? I know why it's a more popular Mega form, but Mewtwo is one of the 2 Pokemon in existence that has 2 Mega forms, and Charizard's second episode had that problem as well. Besides that, both rundowns do their job. But we skip to the fight and...
What's your problem, freak?
Before the fight, this episode was okay. But how does the episode nosedive this hard? What a start, Taka, the voice actor of Shadow, was told to voice him worse in replication of Shadow's voice in Sonic Adventure 2. Definitely not to the episode's benefit. In fact, the audio balancing in general seems inconsistent, excluding the battle track, with all the loud sound design and the characters sounding a little quieter than they should be. Couple that with a battle that doesn't have much of a pace to begin with, Shadow only landing 1 hit! And with calling Shadow's game the worst game ever, and yeah, we have the makings for an all-time worst episode. But this goes a little deeper than just being a bad episode. Back when the episode was released, there was a follow between one of the animators and Screw Attack, so the animation was released the way it was out of spite. I have not felt the need to dive further into why this happened, even though you can see a screenshot of what the heck happened right here. You can still see it. I don't believe this episode was solely made to bully Shadow. He was just the unfortunate character to have received this treatment. While Mewtwo doesn't get too much of anything at all, but that's still better than being blatantly disrespected. In fact, in a few shots you can even see the background not there at all because of the green screen in the background. When going around and asking Death Battle fans what they would consider the worst Death Battle episode, they would probably say that the Season 1 episode I still refuse to name is the worst. But this episode is still a close second. But despite everything I just said, Mewtwo vs. Shadow is one of my guilty pleasures. With the hate around it being generally over-exaggerated and while the aspects I named are still standout negatives, I personally don't get too annoyed at them at first watch. But from an objective standpoint, this episode is still not very good, especially in comparison to the other 2 episodes I talked about earlier. So, what have we learned? To start, we shouldn't take a specific part of an episode and act as if that's the only reason why the episode is bad or why it should be seen as awful. But hey, what do I know? The internet can fluctuate when it comes to a general consensus, but that's perfectly acceptable. Death Battle isn't a show for everyone, and it's completely fine if someone sees only the negatives of the show, which there are many. But to those who've stuck around and enjoyed the show like I have, we look forward to every episode, despite how we would feel about a certain matchup, as the show just gets better and better as each year passes.